Hi and welcome to MIG. Today I'll be showing you our second haircut from our collection. This is Chloe. Chloe has nice long hair that she's been growing for a while. She didn't want too many layers through the back and she wanted to keep as much length as possible. She does have a slight wave and she's quite low maintenance and doesn't blow dry it a lot. As you can see, the ends of Chloe's hair are a little bit fine and sparse, so we discussed how much we could take off and we came to an arrangement of about 2 inches or 5 centimeters. She only has a tiny face, so we're going to open up the face with some layering techniques today. I always work from wet to dry, so I've shampooed and treated our hair, and I'm going to find Chloe's natural part. It's slightly off center and I'm going to cut to this as she doesn't spend a lot of time blow drying or styling her hair. I use my comb to section as it gives me the best clean line that I can get, and I'm working from the front all the way down to the nape. My first section, I'm taking a horizontal section from just below the occipital to the top of the ear. I'm doing this on both sides. I've worked through a little bit of leave-in conditioner so that the hair doesn't dry out too much. You can see that my center section is slightly off center. This is her natural part line. If your client was going to change her hair part around a little bit, you would want to cut it directly to the center. But Chloe just likes to wear it like where it wants to fall. I always make sure that my parts are nice and clean and even, so sometimes I have to fuss around a little bit. I'm starting in the center for my solid and keeping the hair at 0 degrees. I am going to point cut the ends of the hair just so I have a little bit more texture to play with. When I'm point cutting, I'm careful not to cut straight into my fingers and then I leave a little bit of hair to play with. I work from the center to side and then the side to the center, just to make sure that I get a perfect straight line. Point cutting is where you angle your scissors on the side and you create like little jagged part lines. Chloe's hair is quite fine through the back, so my section sizes are a little bit larger. If she had thick hair, I would take smaller sections so I could see my guideline. When working with solid, make sure that you're always keeping the hair down at 0. If you were to elevate it out to yourself, you can actually start to create graduation and it can make your line very uneven. Make sure when you're cutting your second section for your solid that you can see your guide through the first top section. When point cutting, if this is new to you, take your time. Otherwise, if you rush it, you will cut into your fingers. I try not to cut past my second knuckle because then I will hit my palm. Point cutting techniques are great for removal of weight and also for creating more of an uneven textured line. They can be done in both wet and dry hair. I still always go over each section and make sure it's perfect before I move on. This will save me time at the end when I'm double checking. I always start my solid for most of my long haircuts. I don't spend too much time on this as I will always go back and double check it once it's dry, but this is the first thing that I like to do. Some people will start with layers first. This is just my preference. I'm directing all the hair back to a stationary guideline. I'm not taking it over the shoulders because I don't want to round up my corner and I want to keep it square. So each time you cut, you just want to make sure you're cutting straight on that guideline. You don't want to cut a little bit below, otherwise you'll get uneven lengths. My tension is minimal as well. I don't want to strangle the hair as I'm pulling it down. If I had really curly hair and I was strangling it and cutting it, it would actually bounce up and do all sorts of crazy things. I do like to do a little bit of freehand work once I've cut it, and working with dark hair on a white gown really helps with me being able to see what I'm doing. More often than not, with somebody with a finer hair type or someone who's been growing out shorter haircuts, there won't be a lot of hair to cut off as it comes to the front. As you can see with Chloe, she only has a tiny little corner. For the purpose of the video, I am slightly out of the way for the haircut, but if you were cutting this in the salon, you would want to be directly behind this. You can see there's not a lot to cut off, but I always check it. For the front layering, I'm going to work with Chloe's natural part. If your client was moving her hair around and changing her part line, you'd want to cut this to the center. Chloe's low maintenance and she will always just have her natural part line. A natural part line is something that just occurs after every time you wash your hair. It will go to where it wants to go. I'm taking a front section on either side. It's roughly about 5 centimeters wide, and then I'm going to work with directing the hair straight out from the top of the head on both sides, just so I can make sure it's nice and even. And then I'm just gauging how much I want to cut off. I'm going to direct the hair up. I'm taking quite a lot off, and I'm going to point cut this. This is more like a square layer coming out from the front of the head. I'm point cutting this so I get softness. I don't want to create any hard, strong lines around there. I want this to be a movable layer system. I'm then directing everything up and creating that square line at the front. When I'm cutting it, you can see I'm removing quite a bit of hair, but you've got to remember that this will be the shortest point of the haircut, so don't be too scared. I'm checking for balance. I want to make sure that I'm even before I move on. And then all I do now is I've created my stationary guideline. I'm now taking another section and I'm going to direct it straight to that last section. It's kind of like just cutting solid in the air. You can see how much hair I'm removing. This is going to give some great detailing around the face. It's also going to open it up so that you can see her face. Anything that's cut shorter than the chin you can't put up, but you can see everything is below the chin, so she'll be able to still get this up into ponytails. I'm just going to continue to do one side and then I'll move on to the other side. With long hair you do have to comb a little bit and make sure that you've got like a nice conditioning spray on hand, that if it was to get tangly you keep adding this to the hair. I find water can dry out quite quickly, so I always check to see that my guide, and then I'm cutting straight onto that. This is a good technique to create layering around the front and minimal layering at the back. So you can see I'm directing all the hair from the back all the way to the front. You do have to fuss around with your combing a little bit and making sure that your roots are nice and even and that they're free from knots and tangles. I'm going to continue to comb everything from the back all the way forward until I run out of hair. If you were dealing with really long hair, you can maybe section some of the bottom away so you weren't incorporating it in this and weren't cutting into your baseline. But for this, I want to make sure that I have a little bit more of an edgy, softer look, so I'm using all my hair in this layering system. I'm working with a really long comb because I'm dealing with lots of hair, so I want to make sure that I can capture it all in my comb. Sometimes smaller combs can be a little bit too much work with dealing with this technique. Once I reach the back to the front, I will then drop it, shake it, and have a little look. So for the other side, we're going to do exactly the same thing. I'm just showing you on a different angle so that you understand how far forward the hair is being combed. Always working with smaller sections to start off will make things a lot easier for you. Take your time. You don't want to rush this step, as this is the most important part of the haircut. Still using that point cutting technique so that I create softness. You want to make sure that you don't switch your cutting techniques through your haircut, as you can make this look really funny and uneven. Make sure when you're sectioning too that your sections are nice and clean. This will make you look professional and it'll make your end result much better. We call this moving the hair away from the part line, shifting or over directing. When you shift or over direct, you increase in length from where you're moving from. Don't be frightened with how much hair you're taking off. Make sure you always trust your guide. If you start to second guess yourself, this is where you can start to have problems. It will always come back to your consultation of how much hair the client's willing to lose and what kind of lifestyle they lead. You can see how many times I comb it before I cut it. This just ensures that my haircuts are going to be perfect at all times. As you start to work closer to the back, you'll realize you're not cutting as much hair off. This is when you want to make sure that you're following all your guidelines. You do have to be mindful that the hair will be in the client's face a little bit. Just make sure that you're not leaving it there for long pieces of time. You do have to reach over your client quite a bit, so make sure that you're not encroaching in their space and that you're keeping a professional distance. This is my last section. This is where all the hair is in my hand, so I spend a bit of time combing and making sure that everything's nice and neat. This is the trickiest part of the haircut. Once I'm finished, I comb it all down, give it a really good shake and have a look at it. I do like to check for balance and make sure that everything's looking nice and harmonious. I'm then going to blow dry nice and smooth. I'm doing this so that I can check my lines and make sure that everything is even, and then I will create some personalizing techniques using some slicing and point cutting. I don't spend too much time on my blow dryers. I'm going to do some curl techniques through here as well today. I'm using a ball bristle brush as I find this is a little bit softer on blonde hair. It doesn't tug and pull. It gives me a little bit more volume as well. I'm very careful not to connect my hairdryer to my brush for long periods of time. This can cause blow dry burn, and blow dry burn can sometimes be worse than chemical burn. I'm making sure that I get all my little fluffy hairs around the hairline, as the layer is very important around the front, and I want to make sure that I'm checking everything. With my blow dries, I do start blow drying around the front. This is just my preference. I do like to make sure that the client feels comfortable, especially if she had a fringe or any of that. They're used to having hair on their face, so this is the first thing that I do. Once I blow dry, I go through and just give it a good shake up and make sure I've gotten rid of any moisture that might be left on the hair. Now I'm going to start my personalizing techniques. I'm going to do a combination of deep point cutting, and I'm also going to do a little bit of slicing work. The sectioning pattern is going to be exactly the same as for what I created my layer, but I'm going to just check my face shaping and make sure that I get rid of any funny little corners, and then I've got a nice blend. You can see the layer system that I've already put in kind of gives that effect anyway. It's always a good idea to double check your work though. I never assume that I got it perfect on the first go. So I'm deep point cutting in, directly putting my scissors into the hair shaft. This will just blend any soft lines, make sure everything kind of moves and grows out nicer as well. I make sure that my scissors are nice and sharp for this point. If you had blunt scissors, it can grab and pull on the hair. I'm doing a little bit of slicing. This is the strongest texturizing technique. This will actually break up hair and it'll kind of allow it to move around and shatter a bit more. I don't go too heavy on slicing within fine hair, as I can find it tears the hair and can make it a little bit fluffy. I'm just checking my face framing here. I'm doing that in a point cutting method too. With point cutting, I always make sure I flick my wrists so that my hand and my body is in the most natural and comfortable position. I'm always checking my work for balance and consistency. This is why hairdressers use a mirror. Cutting hair not in front of a mirror always ends up with disastrous results. So I do exactly the same texturizing on both sides, so I've got consistency and evenness. Still just working with some slicing, just mainly through that front little section so that it'll grow out nice. It's also nice when you wear your hair up to be able to pull out little shorter pieces. Just shaking and having a look. A lot of hairdressing can be purely visual as well. I'm just going to check my solid quickly and then make sure that everything's sitting nicely. Of course, I point cut my solid to start with. I always make sure I check it with point cutting. I wouldn't want to then come across and straight cut this, otherwise it'd be a waste of time of the point cutting in the first place. Always tilt the head forward and remove any graduation. This is a must in solid. I decided just to put a little bit of a curl in. I'm using my conical and some heat protector, and I'm just doing a light little bend in the hair. This is just an extra little bit of styling that I can make sure the client feels just nice and special. I like working with a conical that's a little bit thicker at the base and gets to thinner. It just gives me a more disheveled kind of curl. The heat protectant that I use has a little bit of hold as well, so this will last. Once I finish my curl, I just run my hands through and just make sure it's all messy and nice and textured. You could use a brush or a comb to comb out your curl. Either way, whatever works for you is fine. Now you can see the layers are shorter at the front and they just get progressively longer through the back. that's the Chloe. Thank you very much for watching.